It's 1950, and the MiG-15 is a Soviet marvel dominating the skies, so advanced it could outmaneuver anything the US had in the air. It was the most guarded secret of the Soviet weapons program. If the Allied forces could get their hands on just a single plane, it could change the course of the Korean War in their favor. The US offered $100,000 to any pilot who could deliver a single plane to them. That's equivalent to approximately $1.2 million in today's money. The story of how the US came to acquire the first MiG-15 is an insane story involving crazy pilots, secret missions, and a race against time that played out on both sides of enemy lines. The plan was called Project Moolah, and while it was ultimately a success, President Eisenhower would go on to say it was the most unethical thing of his career. So, to start, the Korean War was split into two sides. There was North Korea, being backed by the Soviet Union, and there was South Korea, being backed by the United Nations. The conflict was what is known as a proxy war, where two superpowers fight indirectly by supplying each side with resources like weapons and planes. On the South Korean side, they were flying the F-86 Sabre, a jet developed by the US that became known for its agility. Meanwhile, North Korea was equipped with the much more powerful MiG-15, a jet developed by the Soviets that introduced advanced technology. It had swept wings and a powerful turbojet engine. Unfortunately for South Korea, the MiG-15's superior speed, climb rate, and firepower gave it a significant edge in aerial combat, leading to complete domination in the skies. Not only that, things were about to get a lot worse for South Korea, because at the time there were various deep spy operations going on under the command of American General Mark Clark. In February 1951, he made the claim to the Pentagon that the Soviets were lending undercover pilots and planes to support North Korean forces. His intel claimed Soviet air pilots visited North Korean pilots at a Chinese airbase in Jilin. They were there to see if North Korean pilots were good enough to fly the MiG-15 and to consider sending more. By March, Russia had sent the Soviet 324th Fighter Air Division to begin training more North Koreans on how to fly the MiG-15. 1 month later, these same Russian pilots entered combat on behalf of North Korea. They went through great lengths to hide their involvement in the war by painting North Korean signas on the planes. The MiG-15 sightings began to spike up on the NATO-backed South Korean side. This was the worst news South Korea could have gotten, because at this point in the war, many people were hoping the fighting would end. The increased sightings of the new planes led many of the NATO-backed Koreans to think they had no intentions of peace and were introducing more Soviet support into the war. If the war was going to continue, South Korea had to do something fast. This is when the Pentagon's psychological warfare branch put together a plan. The plan was simple. They offered $100,000, which is roughly equivalent to $1 million in today's money, to defect from the Soviet Union with a plane. The plan wouldn't end up working at all how anyone expected. It would be a failure and a success at the same time. The paperwork left the Pentagon on Monday marked as top secret, and it was sent to President Eisenhower for approval. He was opposed to the idea because he thought it was unethical to offer money for a defection. He was also very worried it would affect peace talks with North Korea. He felt they were very close to ending the war with the armistice agreement, but despite his reserves, he gave in to heavy pressure from the Pentagon. The operation, named Project Moolah, was now set into motion. On April 27, 1953, General Clark announced the offer through a radio transmission. It was translated into Korean, Mandarin, and Russian. To all brave pilots who wish to free themselves from the communist yoke and start a new, better life with proper honor. You are guaranteed refuge, protection, humane care, and attention. On that same night, two B-29 superfortresses dropped 1.2 million leaflets over communist bases. In the days following immediately after the drop and broadcast, sightings of the MiG-15 went down drastically. It's debatable if this was because of weather conditions or not, but Clark holds firm the leaflets had a direct effect. He specifically believes that senior communist military leaders began to screen for politically unreliable pilots. On May 10th, the bombers returned once more to drop an additional 40,000 leaflets over Sinuiju and Uju air bases. After these flights, there was again a steady decrease in plane sightings. In the following weeks after that, there was a large formation of 166 planes sighted. Over the next few days, it would decrease to 33, 44, and then there was not a single plane sighted for the rest of the month. Eventually, when the sightings picked back up, a significant change was made. The paint pattern of the MiG-15s were changed. Prior to the airdrops, they all had the same patterns as the Soviet Air Force, a red star. Afterwards, all of them had Chinese and North Korean markings. The following months would be catastrophic for North Korea. It was reported 56 MiG-15s were destroyed, while only a single South Korean plane was lost. South Korean pilots noticed if any of their planes flew close to a MiG-15, the pilot would eject to ensure their personal survival. It seemed like the North Korean pilots were the worst of the war, and all the Russian pilots were no longer helping. At the end of this period, 155 MiG-15s had been lost, while South Korea only lost 3. Shortly after this drastic decline in air ability, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed, which put an end to all combat operations and established clear boundaries between North and South Korea. This didn't mean the quest for the MiG-15 was over though. While the MiG-15 failed to decide the war for North Korea, it was only due to poor piloting and training. The US still needed to get their hands on one, but this time without hurting the peace agreement they had just put into place. Luckily for the United States, in North Korea, Lieutenant No Kum-sok was being questioned by the North Korean regime for his loyalty. His vice battalion commander was summoned to the North Korean Air Force headquarters for 1 week. The purpose of his trip was never officially told to No Kum-sok, but rumors had circulated he was under investigation. If his political loyalty was being questioned, that could only mean one thing. They were likely going to jail him and stop him from flying. A few days had passed since the meeting, and he continued to fly, assuming his commander had defended his loyalty. During this same time, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin died. Because of this, it was becoming increasingly more likely the Soviets would recall their planes from the Korean theater. Seeing this, No Kum-sok knew if he was going to escape, it would have to be now or never. In the early morning of September 21st, 1953, he went on a pre-planned solo flight, flying a MiG-15 with board number Red 2057. His plan was to fly from Sunan Air Base just outside Pyongyang to Kimpo Air Base in South Korea. It would be risky because at any point, if he alerted South Korean radar, he could be shot down. To avoid alerting it, he would have to fly low, which would mean he could be shot down by his own country for trying to flee North Korea. He took off at 9:15 a.m. and while flying as low and fast as possible, he made it to South Korea at 10 a.m. Before they even knew he was there, he had landed. When the airbase saw what had happened, they were absolutely shocked. A fully intact MiG-15 had just landed on their runway. Lieutenant No was taken by helicopter to a secluded US military base at Oryudong just outside Seoul, where the 5th Air Force Intelligence Office was located. He promptly underwent multiple hours of questioning. There were concerns he might be a spy. It was later determined he wasn't, but one of the intelligence officers questioning him had ties to North Korean intelligence and told the regime what had happened. This led to 5 of his fellow pilots being killed along with his commander who defended him. A few questions remain for the NATO forces though. Would the acquisition of the plane's technology be worth it to American forces? Would this upset peace between the two countries? And most importantly, would Lieutenant No get his money? The next morning, South Korean and US newspapers mentioned the defecting North Korean and the resulting $100,000 reward. Lieutenant No, though, was unaware of Operation Moolah and its reward, and while he was at the base for questioning, he was being advised not to take the money in exchange for a paid college education at a university of his choosing. The advice was mostly coming from President Eisenhower. He thought it was unethical to pay people for defections because the North Korean regime was known for punishing friends and family harshly. At the time, it was not known his fellow pilots had been executed. During his questioning, the lieutenant claimed the pamphlets were dropped on the wrong basis. The locations did not have MiG-15 pilots, so the pamphlets wouldn't have had any effect. He also mentioned no one in North Korea knew the purchasing power of the US dollar, so a guarantee of freedom and a job would have been a more tempting offer. For the next few months, Lieutenant No answered several questions about North Korea's military and how much help from the Soviets they had. He also taught the American test pilots how to fly the plane and gave them valuable insights. One of the test pilots said, "Flying the MiG-15 is the most demanding situation I have ever faced. It's a quirky airplane that has killed a lot of its pilots." After around 11 days of testing, the Americans concluded the plane was a decent fighter, but it lacked the technical sophistication of their aircraft. At times, it would become dangerously uncontrollable. There was poor pressurization, unrecoverable spins, unexpected pitch-ups, and a dangerous fuel pump that could explode if not properly activated. Ultimately, it was concluded both the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 were equally capable. After a lot of public outrage, No Kum-sok would go on to get his $100,000. Project Moolah was considered a success and a failure at the same time. There was never conclusive evidence that it had an effect on the war, although it was determined it had nothing to do with the defection and ultimate acquisition of the MiG-15. The plane was offered to be returned to North Korea, but no response was ever given from the country. Today, it sits in the National Museum of the US Air Force on display.